What's up, guys? Doug Polk here with a CardPlayer exclusive strategy video. And today we're going to be talking about how to play the small blind heads up no limit. Now, the first thing I want to address, and this is something that quite often gets asked about heads up no limit, should we be limping the button? And in general, my answer to that is going to be no. As you get into more shallow stack sizes, you're going to want to work in a decent amount of limping, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to focus more on a deeper stack approach here. And in general, when you limp, there's a lot of problems. First off, and this is really the biggest problem, you're not able to win the pot pre-flop, which is huge. You want to put yourself in a position to be able to win the pot with whatever your hand is, good or bad. You want a chance just to take the blinds down, take the blinds down pre-flop and deny your opponent their equity. By limping, you guarantee your opponent sees a flop unless they decide to raise you, which is also kind of bad. So that immediately makes limping a lot worse. Also, even though your price on a limp seems pretty good compared to a raise, if your opponent decides to raise you, all of a sudden you have to fold your hand when you have weak holdings. So while your direct odds are good, you're not closing the action. And that's a pretty important point about the small blind that often gets overlooked. While it's good to be in position for sure, pre-flop in the small blind, you're actually out of position. You have to go first, not last. So limping doesn't really alleviate that problem. And unless you're going to limp some good hands as well, all of a sudden your limp range gets kind of weak. And if you start limping good hands, they can counter you by checking. So we certainly want to try and avoid limping at deeper stack sizes and instead decide to raise with our entire range. We want to continue into the pot. So in general, heads up, I'd say you want to raise somewhere between 75 and 90% of your buttons, and a lot of it comes down to your opponent. If you're playing a loose, aggressive opponent, you're probably going to want to lean more towards the conservative side of that. And if you're playing against a nit or just some kind of tight player or their bad post flop, you might want to lean more towards the higher side of that. As far as facing 3-bets go, the first thing and the most important thing is what size did your opponent 3-bet to? The bigger they go, the tighter you get. And I find a lot of players make a mistake by treating all 3-bets like they're the exact same thing when they're really not. If you face a pot-sized 3-bet, you should only be folding around 40-ish% of the hands you open. But if you face a 5x 3-bet, you should be folding like 60 or 65% of the hands that you open. So your range you continue against different sizes should change a lot. And I think the best way of thinking about that is imagine in limit hold'em. You fold 0% to 3-bet in limit hold'em because when you open and get 3-bet, you're getting 5-to-1 your money just to see a flop. So make sure to play loose enough against small 3-bets while also looking to combat bigger size 3-bets with a tighter range. Now, the way that 4-betting tends to work, you want to try and make a polarized 4-bet strategy between some of your strongest hands and those hands that can't quite call the 3-bet. Now, because that changes so much based on size, I don't want to give you too many specific examples of hands that make good 4-bets, but you might want to consider hands with an ace or a king in them, because those hands have a blocker where your opponent's less likely to have a good hand. If you have a hand like ace-5 off and decide to 4-bet, that means your opponent is that much less likely to have a good hand like aces or ace-king or ace-queen. So that blocker, the ace in your hand, plays a fairly important role. Also, if they decide to flat with a hand like king-queen or king-jack or a suited connector, you're technically ahead in equity and in position, so it didn't work out too badly. Now, I will say, when you look at your 4-bet strategy, it's important to map those bluffs out across a wide range of hands. Because if you only pick specific hands like ace-5, it's going to be kind of obvious what boards you hit or don't hit, and you want to try to avoid that. So you might want to mix in some hands like some low suited connected type hands that also balance your range out and can give you some flush draws. That way, in 4-bet pots, you can hit flushes, you can have some disguised bluffs, and you can create a more balanced strategy that your opponent's not able to see. So in the small blind, you want to make sure to be raising into the pot, opening 75 to 90, and then when you're facing a 3-bet, adjust based on the size, create your value range, and then your call range, and then your bluff range, and you should be just fine. If you're interested in more poker strategy, I'd recommend checking out the Upswing Poker Lab. We don't have heads up content, but we do have a lot of ranges to deal with 3-betting and 4-betting pre-flop for 6-max, ring, live, and tournaments.